So this is the Dillian Whyte, Moses Itauma breakdown. So Moses, he's looking the part. He's destroying the competition. He is getting attention from the media. And people they believe he's the next best thing. But Dillian Whyte, he has an extensive CV. And he also has a tremendous left hook. So let's discuss this more in depth. So to really get into this, I'm just gonna, go through certain things. So the first question that I had when this fight came up was, who is training Dillian Whyte? And from what I can see, Buddy McGirt will be the head trainer. Now, Buddy McGirt, to my understanding, is a former champion, so there's definitely massive credibility there. He's actually currently doing some work, I believe, with Callum Smith, and he was behind Callum Smith's victory against Buatsi. He was behind Callum Smith's victory against Buatsi. Phenomenal performance. Now, how would I describe Buddy McGirt? How would I describe him? I would say that, judging on the Callum Smith performance as a reference, his fighting style is like multifarious. Now, why would I say that? Why would I say that the fighting style is multifarious? Well, if you look at the Callum Smith-Buatsi fight, there were so many different things that Callum Smith did with regards to punch combinations, with regards to punching on the outside, to punching on the inside. There was variation to the work. So what I'm saying is that Buddy McGirt's fighters, typically, if you use that as a reference point, they don't just do one thing. They do many things. They're multifarious. Callum Smith had great counters. I remember he had that left hook to the head, left hook to the body. He really used that effectively, and he would go upstairs and then he would go under, then he would go back to the jab, etc. And I think it was like maybe a short documentary, I saw this content where it was like a mesh of Dillian Whyte and Buddy McGirt talking, and he basically said, can Dillian Whyte do something that they have not seen? Let's clarify the context. Obviously who is they? They is Moses Itauma and Moses Itauma's team. So can they do something that he has not seen? And also, when he added to that, he elaborated on that, I think, and he said, we're going to, take them into deep waters, which is quite a common phase. And I guess what that means is that can Dillian Whyte create a level of adversity that Moses Itauma has never experienced before? And in doing so, that can break certain fighters. Now, we don't know Moses Itauma's mental strength. The people close to him and himself will have an indication of those type of things. But in terms of bringing something he hasn't seen, that could be anything from different punching techniques to definitely he hasn't seen a left hook like Dillian Whyte. And if the fight goes into the middle and later rounds, he will encounter a level of adversity that he hasn't experienced. So there could potentially be a lot of truth into what Buddy McGirt is saying. McGirt also talks about utilizing the defense and being smart. He emphasized that more than once. And then the question becomes, what does it mean to fight smart? Or what does it mean to be smart in a boxing context? What does it mean to be smart in a boxing context? I assume that they're referring to boxing intelligence. So when we talk about Dillian Whyte, and we will talk about Moses Itauma, we understand that his trainer is Buddy McGirt. Buddy McGirt's a credible trainer. He has credentials, good credentials. And Dillian Whyte, he will prepare Dillian Whyte typically in a very good way. And I think it seems that he's going to get Dillian Whyte to focus on not necessarily his aggression, more about having measured aggression. Of course, it's boxing, so being in boxing, a product of being a boxer is being aggressive, but it's about effective aggression that's that's put through a smart measure. So, I guess what does being smart in boxing mean? It can mean being economical with your punches. It can mean, not going all out, not wasting the tank. It could mean, understanding which punches will land, which punches won't. It can mean setting your opponents up for certain types of traps. So if your opponent's throwing a jab, you can catch it and then counter jab. If you know your opponent's throwing a right hand, you can catch the right hand, throw the left hook, etc. So fighting smart predominantly is about, it can be negating your opponent. So I think the concept of fighting smart could be good here. I guess one of the questions is, can you be too smart in a boxing ring? And if you're too smart in a boxing ring, could that be detrimental to your boxing performance? Anyway, so moving on, I feel like the next part, looking through the Dillian Whyte lens, is what is his perspective? Now, in interviews that I've seen so far, he seems to be motivated, which you would expect and you would hope for, but he also seems to be calm and mature. Now, Dillian Whyte is like quite a passionate character. He's also quite funny as well. He had a real good he used to have real good banter with I Film London, with Cassius Coogan, I believe the name is. They used to have a really good rapport on camera. So, but he was quite an aggressive gentleman, and the reference point for that is the first Anthony Joshua fight. Now, they did know each other, so maybe that's what fueled the aggression, but Dillian Whyte was particularly aggressive in that fight. And he has been aggressive in other fights as well. He has that type of demeanor where he will confront you. But he seems a bit more relaxed, a bit more composed, a bit more mature. Will this affect the outcome? Will it affect the way he fights? It's hard to tell. Should he try to intimidate Moses Itauma? Would that be effective? Or should he just purely focus on the training and purely focus on the strategy? But I think Dillian Whyte's perspective, it doesn't seem to be negative. He doesn't seem to be someone who's just coming in to just get a payday. And I think Dillian Whyte is very passionate about his career, and I think he has dignity with regards to his fighting name. So I don't think he's the type of personality that will come in to lay down. I think from what I can see, he's coming to win, and he'll be dedicated. Now, I think the important element of Dillian Whyte's camp will be the sparring. So I think there's some positive things here. I think, like we said, Buddy McGirt's a good trainer, so that's a tick. But I think the sparring is essential, and the question will be, what type of sparring does Dillian Whyte need to be effective against Moses Itauma? Well, clearly Moses Itauma is a southpaw, which means the right leg is forward and the jab is with the right hand. So naturally, everyone he should be sparring should be a southpaw. That should be a given. But these southpaws, they need to be fast and they need to be powerful. So ideally, you would want a combination of sparring partners, some that will be just heavy-handed, will have speed and heavy-handed, but then you'll have some that might have an extra bit of speed. And the whole point of that is, obviously he needs to adjust to the southpaw style, but also he needs to adjust to the speed and power of Moses Itauma. It's going to be very difficult to find someone of the caliber of Moses Itauma. So the sparring, finding someone to replicate the style and then replicate the attributes, is going to be extremely difficult. So from what I've heard, one of their sparring partners is Mike Perez. Now Mike Perez has speed and Mike Perez has power, and he was a contender. Not too, was it 5-10 years ago? He was a serious contender. Now he's gone between, I think, cruiserweight and heavyweight. He's gone between those weights, but I think Mike Perez in shape is a very good sparring partner because he has speed, he has power. I believe he was a counter puncher and he had good boxing intelligence. So that is actually an ideal sparring partner as long as he is in shape. So that to me again seems to be promising. So now let's move to the Moses Itauma camp, and now let's look at Ben Davidson. That's the trainer for Moses Itauma. Now, some people question Ben Davidson, but generally speaking, Ben Davidson is a respected trainer. You don't get to work with the likes of Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, unless you're a respected trainer. He's relatively a young trainer, but he's respected. I also think he does work with Fabio Wardley. And I would say that Ben Davidson's style, he seems to have specific game plans for fighters, and he seems to be quite rigid in like studying fighters. And what I've noticed with Ben Davidson, especially with the work with especially with the work that Ben Davidson did with Anthony Joshua, they really worked on the pull counter. So when the jab come in, you just pull and throw the counter. And if you want a reference point for that, if you want a reference point for the pull counter, or an effective reference point for the pull counter, check out the Ngannou fight. In the Ngannou fight, Anthony Joshua utilizes the pull counter, the right hand pull counter, and it's very effective, extraordinarily effective. Anthony Joshua was so sharp that night. He also tried to implement it against Daniel Dubois, against Triple D, but it was less effective. But definitely the pull counter is something that his fighters definitely do. Like I said, I saw some footage of Ben Davidson on the mitts with Moses Itauma, and also Moses Itauma hitting the bag, and Moses Itauma looked very sharp. He looked powerful, he looked like he had a lot of speed. And I think Ben Davidson, again, he's a type of trainer that studies his opponents. And he also states that Moses Itauma is like a student of the game, similar to like Mike Tyson. So I think this marriage, or this relationship between Ben Davidson and Moses Itauma is a good one. And I think that Ben Davidson will bring a lot to the table. And they're building that relationship. And if you look at the performances from Moses Itauma, it's effective controlled aggression. And I think that effective controlled aggression comes directly from the influence of Ben Davidson. He does nice things, I think, against, McLean, who again is a good fighter, had a good performance against Filip Hrgović. I believe he did a feint with the right and then threw a right hook and then left hook. And I believe that was one of the knockdowns in that fight. And again, it's just, it's something that clearly they've been working on, they've been drilling. So, this is a good, I think it's a positive addition. To have Ben Davidson in your camp is a positive addition to any corner, really. So then the next question would be, what is Moses Itauma's perspective? Well, I would say that because he's undefeated, typically undefeated fighters are confident. Sometimes they can be overconfident, and it's that whole thing of what's the difference between confidence, overconfidence, and arrogance, and how does that affect your performance? So I think the young fighter, being a young fighter and being undefeated and having all this media attention, I think will reinforce the ego that, I'm that guy. So he'll be confident. But it's important that it stays in the confident box and not in the arrogant box. What I get from Moses Itauma in interviews is that he's not really, doesn't do loads of talking, doesn't seem to be particularly he doesn't seem to be like a Tyson Fury in front of the cameras. He's definitely not like Daniel Dubois, that's one extreme, but he's not like Tyson Fury. He seems to be quite composed, just has that quiet confidence. I kind of like it. So I think he'll be so confident coming into this fight. But it's important that he's not overconfident, because this could potentially be a difficult fight. So what should Moses Itauma's training camp look like? What should his training camp look like? I think if I was training Moses Itauma, I'd be looking at, okay, what does a prime Dillian Whyte bring to the table? We have to assume that the best Dillian Whyte is coming. Don't prepare for the worst version of Dillian Whyte, prepare for the best. Because if you prepare for the worst version of Dillian Whyte and the best version comes, then you're going to be in trouble. So I would say the best version of Dillian Whyte has a phenomenal left hook. He does the catch and counter very well. Many references to this. The Anthony Joshua fight in round 2, Dillian Whyte does the catch and counter, implements it tremendously. His left hook in general is just phenomenal. Check the Joseph Parker fight. The Lucas Brown fight is another reference point. And also, who else? You've got the Joseph Parker fight, you've got the Lucas Brown fight, and of course you've got the Dillian Whyte fight. And what's interesting is when he throws the left hook, when I've seen him throw the left hook, he doesn't dip and then throw. He generally just throws it with, it's almost like he throws it like that as opposed to dipping with it, but he's still able to generate massive amounts of power. It kind of reminds me of how Evander Holyfield, the great Evander Holyfield, who was undisputed cruiserweight and undisputed heavyweight champion, when he would throw the left hook, he would just throw it real short, but he would get loads of power into that short punch. And Dillian Whyte seems to be able to do that. So even though it's a short trajectory, it's powerful and it can knock you out. So you need to find a sparring partner that throws the left hook like that, but ideally can generate power from the left hook like that. That is really essential. Again, it's going to be kind of hard to find sparring partners that can do that. And I guess the question is, you can't have sparring partners come with their style. You kind of need to guide them to be like, okay, I need you to try and replicate the Dillian Whyte style. And I think the skill of a trainer is to try and instruct someone to specifically try and duplicate certain things that their opponent may do in the ring. So they need to have that short left hook. Also, Dillian Whyte's a powerful, strong, rough house type of guy. So you need someone that will be able to bring those type of rough house tactics. And also, I think there's a few other things. I think you need to bring in a fighter that has good boxing intelligence, because Dillian Whyte has experience. He's fought so many different fighters. He's practically fought everyone. You had Tyson Fury, Povetkin, Anthony Joshua. Like, he's fought so many good fighters. So he has experience, and through that experience you develop your boxing IQ, you develop your boxing intelligence. So it's important that these fighters can kind of match the puzzle that Dillian Whyte may present, and he could present a variety of puzzles, that short left hook being part of it. But also, I would suggest that the sparring needs to be broken down into a few components, and in the mid-round sparring, I think you need to bring in fresh fighters that will then try and target the body. Because I think if Dillian Whyte is able to get through the first part of the fight, he will then start to change the trajectory of his punches and will try to invest in the body. So to counter that, you need to be able to catch those body shots and also throw effective counters. On top of that, you need to be able to be conditioned enough to be mobile in the midpoint of the fight. So if you need to get a breather, or if you need to get away from the body punches, you need to be in shape enough to be able to move away and also hurt your opponent with effective counters, so that you can get time not only to breathe, so to speak, but to properly assess your opponent. And I think that's really essential, because if Moses Itauma is overconfident and doesn't do the appropriate work, if it goes to the mid rounds, the body work could be a telling factor. It'll be interesting to see if it goes into the middle rounds, how Dillian Whyte, what will be his punch repertoire. Will he do body? Will he do left hook to the body, left hook to the head? Or will he do the Canelo's favourite, the right uppercut to the head, the left hook to the body? Or will he just go straight to the body? Will he just go through the front door? That will be, it'll be intriguing to see how Dillian Whyte approaches that. But I'm pretty sure that they will have some type of strategy as the fight progresses, assuming that the fight does progress. So, okay, so let's make a transition. So we spoke about Dillian Whyte's trainer. We spoke about Moses Itauma's trainer. We spoke about what perhaps they should have in their camps. Let's now talk about how do they win the fight. So I think with regards to Dillian Whyte, how does Dillian Whyte win this fight? Well, I think there's a few things he needs to do. I've watched a few fights of Moses Itauma, and I've noticed that he feints really well. So, but when he feints well, especially when he's feinting to the head, he will drop the jab to the body. Now, this is all about timing. But at some point, you could time that jab to the body, which would be coming here, which would be coming, the left side of the body, and you might be able to time that short left hook. So that's something to consider. Now, you might not be able to time it in round 1, but you may be able to time it in round 5, 6, and 7, etc. Also, and this is a controversial strategy, this is what George Foreman did to Michael Moorer in their fight. Maybe, obviously try and, use the lead hand to blur the vision, but also maybe sometimes try and put the left hand on the right shoulder to try and control the trajectory of the jab and disrupt the rhythm. I think that could be good. And also, Moses Itauma has a short right hook. And also, when he throws the short right hook, I've noticed his hand placement is really good. Again, we have to give Ben Davidson some credit here. That's effective drilling. So when he's throwing the right hook, his left hand placement is really good. But you could potentially counter him with the left hook. It's very risky, particularly with Moses Itauma's timing, speed, and power. And again, you might not want to try the counter in round 1, but if you can invest in the body, and if Moses gets tired, then maybe you try it in round 4, maybe you try it in round 7, etc. But the counter left hook will be essential, and actually catching and nullifying the right hook will be essential. Also, I've noticed there's one thing that I've noticed with Moses Itauma that's quite negative. In the clinch, he seems to just switch off. And I think if you throw hard punches, you could catch him. Now, there's various ways you can approach it. Do you just throw a hard right hook? Or do you throw a hard left hook? Or maybe do you go with the uppercut to the head and then hit him to the left hook to the body? And because he's kind of like switched off, maybe you miss with the right uppercut, or maybe he catches the right uppercut, but then you hit him with that left hook to the body, which could, have a substantial impact into the fight. Or do you go body head? But I definitely think in the clinch, there is an opportunity. Clearly as well, Dillian Whyte will probably be heavier, even if he comes in light. And I think in the clinch, yes, he could take advantage with punches, but he could also try and use it to try and drain Moses Itauma's energy. So I think that would be good, particularly in the middle rounds. This is the referee's role is important here, because some referees will allow you to do certain things in the clinch and other referees won't. But there definitely seems to be a bit. Moses Itauma seems sometimes quite lackadaisical in the clinches. Now, maybe it's because of the context. Maybe he just doesn't respect the power of certain opponents or whatnot. And maybe in this different environment, maybe he'll make less mistakes. Maybe he'll make more mistakes. We'll see. And also, in theory, Dillian Whyte should have superior IQ. So he needs to utilize his superior boxing intelligence purely because he has, he's fought better opposition and therefore would have dealt with different boxing puzzles. He needs to utilize that by presenting different boxing puzzles to Moses Itauma. And I think Buddy McGirt, he's the type of fighter that will equip you with loads of different little traps. So, a trap can be anything from, throwing the feint with the jab and then hitting them with the right hook, or, the left hook to the head and then the left hook to the body. Just that variation of attack, or even where you throw the right hand, maybe instead of throwing it to the chin or to the head, maybe you throw it to the chest. So when a fighter dips or gets low, you can catch them on the chin. So just having that boxing intelligence to make those certain adjustments can make a significant difference. And with Dillian Whyte's experience, he should be able to make those adaptations on the fly. So that's how Dillian Whyte could win the fight. But how does Moses Itauma win the fight? Now, interestingly, because Moses Itauma has been fighting regularly and often, he will have really good timing going into this fight. So assuming that he doesn't get overwhelmed by the event, because this will be his biggest event, there is the potential he could catch Dillian cold. I hope that doesn't happen, but there is that potential. But if it does go into the middle rounds, there's a few things that Moses Itauma needs to do. Number one, he needs to have that mobility, where if he needs to get a breather, then he's got, the movement and the footwork and the conditioning to be able to do that. He needs to be able to counter Dillian Whyte's body punches. So it's like if Dillian Whyte throws, the uppercut to the body, counter it, the hook to the body, you counter it with a powerful uppercut. What does that do? It stops your opponent from throwing body shots, gives you more time to process what's going on, and it nullifies their input, and then you can start scoring points with the jab and then setting up your offense. This is linked in with composure. He needs to be composed when it gets to the middle rounds, because Dillian Whyte will be hoping that the occasion might make him make certain mistakes. So to me, composure is effective hand placement. So his hand placement will be there. So like when he throws the hook, his left hand will be there, and effective head movement. So you should either be moving your legs or moving your head. Additionally to this, he needs to negate Dillian Whyte's left hook throughout the whole fight. He needs to respect that weapon that Dillian Whyte brings to the table, and ultimately he needs to counter that left hook. He needs to take that left hook away. Think of like when Lennox Lewis fought Tommy Morrison. Tommy Morrison had a phenomenal left hook, an absolutely phenomenal left hook. Check out the Razor Ruddock fight for a reference, or just check out Tommy Morrison's highlights. But Lennox Lewis took the left hook away, and he really needs to respect and nullify that left hook. David Tua also had a great left hook. And additional to this, he needs to use the uppercut. If you look at Dillian Whyte's losses, so you look at the Tyson Fury fight, the Povetkin fight, and the Anthony Joshua fight, I believe in all of those fights, the knockdowns came from, I believe it was right uppercuts. So the uppercut is a punch that he can be susceptible to. And that makes sense because clearly he's getting, a lower, when he's dipping down, he's getting a lower sense of gravity and a smaller target. So when someone has a lower sense of gravity and a smaller target, the uppercut can be an essential punch. So, and I'd say additionally to this as well, at the beginning, Moses Itauma has shown composure, aggressive composure, utilizing feints, and then setting up his attacks. And he needs to maintain that. This event is going to be a big experience for Moses Itauma. So he needs to act within character. He needs to keep his composure, and he needs to basically just replicate what Ben Davidson is telling him. And that will help. Because if he acts out of character, that means there will be more mistakes. I guess there's other questions, like should Moses Itauma punch at the target or through the target? I guess that depends on the stage of the fight. Dillian Whyte is a counter puncher, so I think generally against counter punches at the beginning you should punch at the target to give them less of an opportunity to counter. But if you can slow the counter puncher down, then you can start to try and punch through the target, but be very aware of the danger of doing that. So who wins the fight? What's the percentages? You know what? On a personal level, I really hope that Dillian Whyte has a good performance. I really do. I don't want to see him knocked out early. So I really want to see Dillian Whyte have a good performance. I think Dillian Whyte has given a lot to boxing. I think he's given some really, he's given his heart and soul. And if he does lose, I would like to see him give a great account of himself. I think a lot of people are assuming that Moses just walks through him. But I think that kind of disrespects the CV of Dillian Whyte. He has an extensive CV. So in respect of that CV, I think that there's a strong chance that Dillian Whyte can give Moses Itauma a very hard fight. But I think it's going to be difficult for Dillian Whyte to win the fight. Now, I think some people are thinking that it's 90-10 that Moses Itauma wins. But I think when you look at the extensive CV and when you see what potentially Dillian Whyte could bring to the table if he's on his A game, I think you've got to bring that to 70-30. Maybe some would, would say 60-40, but I think this, obviously there's the variable of boxing that you could just land a shot and then it's all over. So there's obviously that, and that can happen either way. But can Dillian Whyte win this fight? Yes, he can win this fight. Will Dillian Whyte win this fight? The odds are stacked against him. Let's be honest. With matchmaking, if they felt that Dillian Whyte had a chance to really win this fight, they wouldn't put him in there with him. But he can win this fight, and there's a chance he can win this fight. However, with all things considered and respecting Dillian Whyte's resume, the overwhelming favourite will be Moses Itauma. He will be the overwhelming favourite. And I think, I would say rightfully so, but as the fight progresses, or if the fight progresses, Dillian Whyte's chances increase exponentially. So as the fight progresses, Dillian Whyte's chances increase exponentially, and I really hope he has a great performance. I really do. And remember, everyone was writing Dillian Whyte off against Anthony Joshua, and again, he had a great performance. So with that said, just some brief questions. What happens to Dillian Whyte if he loses? I think if he loses, if he's just destroyed early, I think that kind of affects Dillian Whyte in terms of moving on and making a big payday. But if he has a really good performance, even if he loses, if he has a good performance, this could set up some big paydays. I think a lot of people would want to see that. I think people, who would they want to see him against? Who would they want to see Dillian Whyte against? And the name Derek Chisora, I think people would want to see that fight. The first two fights were really good fights. The first fight was just an absolute brawl. The second fight was a bit more controlled, but it still was a really good fight. And then you had the emphatic knockout at the end. So I think that will be a fan favourite fight. I'm not sure if people would want to see the Joseph Parker rematch, and I think they're on different trajectories. There's the Anthony Joshua fight. Again, if he had a good performance, would Anthony Joshua consider it? Would he take that risk? I don't know. But it's not just if Dillian Whyte loses, it's how he loses. But what happens to Moses Itauma if he loses? What happens to Moses Itauma if he loses? That would be considered a huge upset if he loses. And again, the nature of that upset would maybe determine a lot of things. Clearly, if he was to lose to Dillian Whyte, all this talk about fighting and beating Usyk would be thrown out the window by the public and the boxing purists. But if it was a great fight, then obviously you would have a rematch, the potential of a rematch. There would have to be the rebuilding process. And remember Daniel Dubois when he lost to Joe Joyce. That was an upset, but he did rebuild and he did become champion of the world. So for me, this is a very compelling and interesting fight. And I guess I'm just really hoping that I really hope the fight doesn't end early, and I really hope we get a competitive and engaging contest. And I think there's enough elements in this fight to suggest that it has the potential to be a really good fight.